Live from the Talking Joe Studios, it's Talking Joe.
Talking Joe is on the air.
Hey, it's me, Mark, and welcome to Talking Joe, the G.I. Joe Comics podcast. Now, today we will be looking at the first Silent Mission special, G.I. Joe, A Real American Hero, Beachhead, Issue 1, released 2nd of April 2025. This is the first of several Silent Missions one-shots that will be coming out in the month of April, and this one joining the reissue of the original one that started it all, A Real American Hero, issue 21. But I will not be talking about this issue on my own. I will be joined by two additional people, the first of which is my regular co-host. It's A Real American Tim. It's Tim Finn.
Hello, Mark, and hello, listeners. And listeners, you're missing out because Mark's camera is presenting some problems. So viewers, no pictures of Mark today, just Mark's icon. Enough of that. Let's bring in our guest.
So we are joined today by the creator, the writer, the artist, the same person who did both. It is the one, the only, Phil Hester. Welcome to Talking Joe, Phil.
Hey, everybody. It's great to be here.
That is fantastic to have you on. Now, as well as being the writer-artist of this comic, anyone who's been around comics for a little while will probably recognize your name. You've been in the at the top of the business for a while now, whether it's on Green Arrow, The Irredeemable Ant-Man, The Darkness, Swamp Thing, Gotham City Year One, or one of the many other titles that you've worked on. It's great to have you finally working on G.I. Joe.
Yeah, I don't know how I dodged it for so long. It's because it's been a comics property all this time, and I've been like, you recited all the chains I forged in life there. I've been everywhere, and to have not worked on G.I. Joe over the last 40 years is pretty startling. But I'm glad I broke the drought, and I'm glad I broke it with this issue, and I'm glad I broke it with this tribute to the Hama Lealoa silent issue.
Mm. Is that to say that you had been aware of that issue from 1984 previously? And if so, how?
Yeah, of course. In 1984, I was 18. So I was 17 turning 18. So I'm squarely in the demographic that is too old for A Real American Hero. I am Atomic Man, Intruder, Bullet Man, Eagle Eye Joe, Kung Fu Grip, G.I. Joe. That's my G.I. Joe.
Adventure Team and Super Joe?
Yeah, that's my stuff. And so my brother, who is just 4 years younger than I am, is squarely, Real American Hero guy. So there's that gap. So when the cartoon and the comic started, it like wasn't my jam. I was even like, I guess I was too mature to be into A Real American Hero, but too immature to not be bitter about it replacing Kung Fu Grip. So like my younger brother's into it, but so I only bought the G.I. Joe comic when it was like issues that were special to me or artists that were special to me. And even at that age, I was really keyed into innovative storytelling in comics. And that silent issue was like a legendary gig from the minute it came out. Like, people knew it was a special issue. And so even people that were not regular G.I. Joe buyers like myself, we bought that comic. I would say that was like sort of my touchstone to A Real American Hero G.I. Joe for a long time. And so, yeah, my connection to that silent issue is for the longest time was my connection to G.I. Joe.
You mentioned innovative issues or big deal issues or big deal artists. Are there any other issues in G.I. Joe which you took note of as they were published in these last decades?
Well, because of that silent issue, of course, I have I've met Larry and talked with Larry many times, and I got a lot of respect for Larry. But because that silent issue sort of opened my eyes to what that book could be, and what that property could be, I would dip in now and again when they were just like, even today, like, I consider myself a superhero fan, but I don't buy every issue of Green Lantern. I buy Green Lantern when creators I particularly enjoy are working on the character. And that's largely a function of being at this as a creator for almost 40 years and as a fan for like 55 years. So, or 50 years. So, you literally can't track one property forever. I mean, you guys can. You've got a podcast about it, but
just one.
Right. But I myself, like, I'm keeping track of all these different. I'm a fan of Star Trek, Doctor Who, Conan, superheroes. All these things, and like, you literally can't be a rabid fan of all those things. You can be a casual fan of all those things, but a rabid fan of the people who produce it in a way that you engage with. And that's what I would call myself. So when there's a great writer, a great artist on Daredevil, I buy Daredevil. Same with G.I. Joe. I would drop in when there were creators that I found really interesting doing the book.
I did have a little bit of a Google to see if you had ever touched G.I. Joe professionally in any space sphere before. And what I came up with was just one illustration by you, which was
that's just a con sketch. Yeah,
a cool con sketch of Flash, which is very distinctively in your style there, with some cool grey tones there added to it as well. Very slick for a con sketch.
Thanks.
A nice bit of polish, but you.
Go ahead.
But not too many other touch points in terms of exploring these characters up to this point.
No, like I said, largely because of demographic reasons.
Mm-hmm.
I'm just a few years too old for that.
Phil, where were you getting your comics in 1984?
So by 1984, the first comic shop had opened in my area. It opened probably 82, but before that, I was buying off the newsstand. So I would go to one drugstore for my DC comics, a different drugstore for my Marvel comics, and a different grocery store for like my Tomb of Draculas and Savage Sword of Conans and Heavy Metals. I had all these different sources. So I think my mom thought it was funny that suddenly at the age of 11, I was interested in going grocery shopping with her. Because I wanted to hit all these different venues every week to see what they had.
Where was this?
I still live in rural Iowa, and so we would go and like I live in such a small town that we go to different towns for different things. So like one pharmacy is 15 miles away, one grocery store is 10 miles away. And so we would go to all these surrounding towns to get all the things I wanted. And the story that stands out the most to me is that there was one drugstore 13 miles away that carried Charlton Comics. And this is toward the tail end of Charlton Comics even existing. But I needed to get my Charlton Comics. So I actually rode my bike the 13 miles.
Wow.
And I thought I could, because when you're 12, you're an idiot. And I did it, and then called my mom on the pharmacy's phone and begged her to come get me. But I got my Charlton Comics.
Wow.
So what I know about Iowa is that it's the home of both Ron Wagner
Yes.
And the G.I. Joe convention assembly required, organized by Brian Sauer with Travis
Yeah.
Weber.
And I know all those dudes. And for some reason, maybe they'll invite me this year, but I think it's always scheduled across a different, opposite a different Comic-Con in Iowa. That's at that same time. So I haven't seen Ron for probably like 5 years because he's always committed to that G.I. Joe Con. But yeah, I know Brian and Ron and all those guys too. Yeah, they're good guys. You can't. Iowa's only 3 million people as a state, so you kind of, if you're into comics, you sort of know everybody here that's into comics.
If you're a small town guy and have been one, when you go to New York to network with editors, do you have big city shell shock?
Yeah, a little bit. I would say the best thing about my job is I do live in I live in a town of 1,000 people, and it's in the middle of cornfields. So, but for 12 to 15 weekends a year, I'm in some of the nicer cities of the world, and so I get enough city living to sort of like sate my desire for that sort of thing. And they get to retreat to the solitude and the quiet of the small town to actually do my work.
And we often in the beginning of our talk sort of talk about people's route into comics, how whether they went to the Joe Kubert School, for example, and the first big break in the big city, normally in New York, right, knocking on the doors and showing off the portfolio. What was your routine and your big break into comics?
Yeah, I think I've only done 2 or 3 of those New York pilgrimages. And by the time I had done them, I was already a working professional. I was just looking for more work. I was really lucky in that, again, it's a timing thing, a demographic thing. I went to university. I went to the University of Iowa to get my Bachelor of Fine Arts degree. And that was in 84. And that's around the time the Turtles broke big as a comic book. And so overnight, the American comic scene went from a handful of publishers to dozens and dozens of publishers who were trying to cash in that same mode as the Turtles.
The black and white explosion.
That's exactly what it was, the black and white explosion. So anybody that had a working Visa, MasterCard, could print a comic book during that time and expect to double and triple their money. It was like a slam, because retailers at that time were ordering everything because they didn't know what the next hot thing would be. It wasn't a sustainable system, but it was a great place to get your start. So I think it was in the summer between my sophomore and junior years that I got very serious about sending my samples out. And it got picked up by a very small publisher called Silver Wolf out of the Northwest. And by the time I was a junior in college, before I had my degree, I was a published cartoonist, which to me was it was terrible work. I don't want anybody to ever hunt it down. In fact, when people bring it to me to sign at cons, I offer to buy it from them to get it off the market. But when you're 18, 19 years old, 20 years old, and you're published and you're ostensibly getting paid to do this while you're still in school to learn how to do this, it's very heady. And it felt like I was winning already. But that's how I started. And I sort of just climbed that ladder, from the indies to the, sort of street level publishers to the smaller mainstream publishers to Marvel and DC. And I did a Captain America story when I was 24, I think, for Marvel. And that was probably my first big 2 gig.
Uh-huh. Hey, look! I just did a search to try and track down Silver Wolf.
No,
am I allowed to share it on screen?
Our guest was threatening before we pressed record to D6 this. this hole
My
in
hand
you.
is, it's hovering over the leave studio button.
Okay, all right.
No,
So we'll tell. I won't
people-
share it in the studio, and I'll tell
Listen.
the listeners to definitely not Google Phil Hester port Silverwolf.
Right. Listen, there are working professionals who ask me for sketches of port, bring me issues of port to sign, partially because they know it gets under my skin, but also because they're 80s kids. And like when you see stuff when you're a kid, like you have, like your critical awareness doesn't exist. It just like, oh, that's cool. I want to know more about that. And so like I have a huge soft spot for some goofy stuff that came out in the 70s, that stuff that's kind of indefensible in some ways. And there are people that are fans of this stuff that I'm not proud of. And it took me a long time to learn to get over that, because when you run that stuff down in front of those people, you're almost invalidating their experience and the joy they got from the work. And it's important to back out of that and appreciate it the way they appreciated it. So anytime somebody brings me something to sign or talk about, the first thing in my mind has to be thank you. So I reserve my self disdain for my private moments.
I think Tim and I can both empathize with the things that we were reading when we were around about 10 years old, making an indelible mark on us.
Sure.
You might be able to draw some conclusions about what those things might have been.
Yes.
Suddenly, I want to jump to much more recently, just to counterbalance Phil's earliest and perhaps least work. So, the list of your biography was work for hire, but you also did that image series, The Family Tree.
Yeah.
Can you talk about creator-owned, how you sort of worked that, what it got you? Could you do more?
Yeah. I feel lucky. This is, again, a luck of the time I was born, that so many other freelancers had fought to create that creator-owned ecosphere, that by the time I was a working professional, there was no question that, like, if you wanted to have a well-rounded career, you would do both. You would have a lot of creator-owned stuff and work for hire as well. And I feel like I split my time pretty evenly between both worlds. I think sometimes the work for hire stuff is more high profile, but the creator-owned stuff is work for hire is fulfilling, and creator-owned is fulfilling in a different way. Like when you do work for hire, you're allowed to work on these iconic characters and iconic franchises like G.I. Joe. But when you do creator-owned, you're creating your own stuff, and it's your real voice. So, whether it's Family Tree or Fire Breather or The Coffin or all the short stories I've done for places like Negative Burn and Taboo, and I always have a creator-owned project cooking at all times. If I'm drawing Green Arrow, I'm working on, something else that you probably may not know about unless you're keyed into that world. And it's funny that's the weird thing about the sort of the balkanization of comics fandom, is there are people that only read Marvel, and they think I retired from comics because I haven't done anything since Ant-Man, and then there are people that only read Image Comics, and they think I haven't done anything since Mythic with John McCrae, because I haven't, or Family Tree with Jeff Lemire, because I haven't had anything at Image since Family Tree. But I've been working at DC. So I like to have, my eggs in all those different baskets, not just from a career security standpoint, but from a creative satisfaction standpoint as well.
We should probably talk about this G.I. Joe comic now, Mark, huh?
Silent Missions, Beachhead, comes to us from the creative team of a writer, penciler, Phil Hester, inker, Travis Hymel. Actually, let's while we're doing this, let's pause here. What's the magic formula that brought inker Travis Heimel to the creative team, and I guess particularly for an artist like you, where the contrast of the black and the white is so important to your work. How do you go about bringing on board an inker like this?
Yeah, I'm a little bit tougher to ink than I look, because my stuff is so high contrast and so much about gesture and simplified forms and angular lines. It looks easy to do, but a lot of inkers are so trained on classical illustration that they get in there and they can't accept that, this line is just like a razor slash. Don't feather this, just slap it down. And so it takes a while to find an inker that you can be like in tune with. And the reason I use so many inkers and don't ink myself is it goes back to what we were talking about before with Creator on stuff. I feel like I always need to be writing something as well as drawing something. And I would rather divide my time between writing and penciling than penciling and inking. So I always, and also, to be frank, I don't feel like my hand is steady enough to ink my work the way I would like it to be inked. I can do certain things, like maybe horror projects as my own inker or artsy projects as my own inker, but anything that requires sort of any sort of technical acuity or slickness, I need to bring in an inker for, because I just can't move my hand the way I can move it when I pencil. And so Travis is sort of my third regular inker. I've been very lucky to, third or fourth, I've been very lucky to only work with a handful of inkers that have been on the same page with me aesthetically and as friends. And that's Andy Parks, who inked my work for a long time, notably on Green Arrow. And then Eric Gapster, who inked me for another decade, and notably on Gotham City Year One. And both of those guys have sort of graduated. Andy's graduated to functioning mostly as a writer and writing. He wrote the graphic novel that became the Extraction series of movies.
Oh, wow. Mm-hmm.
And Eric has become a penciler and an artist, and he just finished the comic book adaptation of the new Spider-Man cartoon. I can't remember what it's called. Friendly Neighborhood Spider-Man, yeah. And also he writes and draws middle grade graphic novels. So they've all become too good to work with me. And I had to find a new guy, and Travis definitely fit that bill, because his own aesthetic is rooted in that sort of Alex Toth high contrast simplified form style, and it was a natural fit. And this is probably only the third gig we've done together, and I'm really happy with the way it turned out.
Maybe we can, Mark, ask the same question for the next person listed in the credits.
Colorist Lee Lowridge.
Yes, Lee's kind of a living legend, and Alex Antone, the editor of this project, asked me for a list of colorists I wanted to work with, and just like an inker, I'm kind of difficult to color as well, because my approach is very graphic and very flat. I don't mean graphic in terms of violence or anything like that. I mean in terms of like graphic application. So
like design.
Yes, exactly. So I rely on composition more than other artists might, and so my stuff almost can't be colored literally. It has to be like you have to back out and take a certain abstracted approach to coloring me. And Lee's good enough that Lee can do it however he wants. And in this case, he found that perfect balance, I think, between realistic like lighting and textures, but also muting things so they fit that sort of dark, grimy world that I was trying to portray.
Can you go back to that word, abstract? What do you mean abstract color?
What I mean by that is it doesn't correspond to natural color. So,
or not local color.
Yeah, or local color, I bet the best example, I don't know if you've seen it, but if you've seen Gotham City Year One, what Jordi Belair did with me on that book, The colors represented on the page do not represent the colors you would see in reality if you looked at any of the objects depicted. She pushed it to different levels by taking just like a different kind of color theory approach. And that's sort of what my work demands. If you try to color me like somebody would color Jim Lee, it falls apart completely. And so it's kind of a tough balancing act to find a colorist that knows how to handle me. And then when I find a colorist like that, I like sink my harpoon into them and like never let go. And since I don't draw in a realistic fashion, I can't be colored in a realistic fashion. That's almost working at counter purposes to what I draw. And so Lee picked up on that, even though I think this is the first thing Lee and I have ever done outside of maybe a cover here or there. And
sorry.
Yeah, and he got it.
There's a little example that Mark Chiarello offers in the DC Comics Guide to Lettering and Coloring, and he writes the coloring half, and there's a Mike Mignola. There's like a sliver of a Mike Mignola cover, and it's got Dead Man. And Chiarello says, here are 3 different ways to color this kind of art, and 2 of them don't work, and one of them's really rendered. It's like, no. Mignola's drawing, this is cut paper.
Yes.
And the final example is such like flat red and then like flat white.
That's why Dave Stewart works so well on Mignola. And I was lucky he just colored a Swamp Thing cover I drew as well. And it's more about the color choices than it is about any sort of fancy modeling or special effects you might bring to I'm definitely in Cheese camp in terms of aesthetic thinking. Chiarello's, he's on the ball.
You see that issue of Batman he just did?
Yeah. Oh. Really cool.
Yeah. Speaking of Dave Stewart.
Yeah. Dave can do no wrong. I love Dave. And Dave can color everybody. He can move up and down the dial and color whatever your style is. He can do it all.
And Lee Lowridge, he's a colorist that obviously is popular with the commissioning editors at Skybound. He had recently worked on the Scarlet series and has got some more work coming up, I think, in the main Joe title.
The other fantastic thing about Lee is he'll turn this stuff around almost instantly, which I hope maybe he doesn't want that getting out, because then editors are like, I'll pile more work on him. But he did all this in such a lightning fast manner that we were all like stunned.
Mark, are there other credits that you want to cite?
Yeah, so we've got. Actually, I had one question before we move on from colors, which was just: did you have notes for the colorist specifically, or did you just leave it to him to make his own judgment?
I try to leave it to the color. I've done enough as a writer and an artist. I've been around this job enough to know that to have respect for the other people that you're collaborating with and to let them do their thing. So it would take something catastrophic for me to give another artist notes. I might give a note ahead of time that says something like, this snow is slushy and gross, or it's twilight. I might give a note like that. But I don't try to impinge on any sort of like aesthetic choices they're making. You do all that in the Tinder part of the job, like when you're like when you're swiping left or right on who you're going to work with.
In picking Lee Lowridge, you mean?
Right.
You've already made a bunch of decisions.
Exactly, and that's how the best editors work. Like they're not going to pick you and then try to like force you into the to fit any sort of mold. They're picking people out already fit that mold. So getting Lee, 90% of the job is done, and that 10%, I'm content to let Lee do his thing. Same with Travis and the inking, and same with any other gigs I might have, like across the superhero spectrum as well. You have to have respect for the people you're working with. Like I would not, if I handed in pencils and I got a bunch of notes from a writer about what I should like, can you have another go at drawing this panel? I would do it because I want to be a good collaborator, but that person would, I would swipe left next time. Or which way is it for bad? I've been married for 40 years. I don't know. So like, whichever way you swipe to reject, I would finish the gig, and I wouldn't speak ill of that person, but I would make a note in my head that like, this is not somebody I'd like to, because they don't respect what I do.
So other credits being letterer NA, with apologies to Pat Brousseau, who is the current Real American Hero letterer. That's a sweet note that was inside the front cover from Alex.
But I will say I've used Pat enough on my own. Like I've done a couple like special projects of my own over the last few years that I've just hired Pat directly. So I've made up for that. So
okay.
I didn't really cost Pat any money.
Okay. And editor Alex Antoni, publication design Gillian Crabb, and creative consultant Diana Davis.
But also, if we're doing this joke about costing a letterer money or not for not doing this issue, these 5 issues are extra issues.
Mm-hmm.
Or these 5 issues replace one monthly issue.
A skip month.
The original issue 21 was a regular issue, and letterer Rick Parker did only letter the first page. Although he has said he ruled. Sorry?
There's some computer screen graphics. Did he do those? I don't know.
I don't think he did. I think he said that was someone else.
Where Destro's looking at a computer readout.
I think that's pencil and ink art. Parker did.
He did rule the pages still, I think.
Yeah, he described that the letterer then would do all the outlines for panel borders, so he would have had his hands on every page.
That's back when you. That's back. This is how old it was, and how old I am that I started working this way. That's back when you penciled a page, and then it got physically sent to a letterer. And it got lettered and then physically sent to an inker. And so inkers had different rates for lettered or unlettered pages. Because unlettered pages, you had to cover more of the page. So you got paid more. Yeah.
Right. And that's also separate from the different rate that a inker would get or a finisher would get.
Right.
Working from pencils or breakdowns.
I think Steve technically finished that issue, didn't he?
Yes, he was not inking over tight finished pencils.
And you can tell the figures are very Lealoa-ish. It looks very much like the stuff he was doing around that time on Spider-Woman.
But the faces are very Hama.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Mark,
sort of flicking between the two. It's definitely Hama is doing some really great layouts and doing the bulk of the composition, but Lealoa is a very active partner there. He's really bringing a lot to his finishes.
I don't want to let this pass without mentioning that I think he's probably like one of the best half dozen inkers that have ever worked in comics. Like I think he can ink anybody, and he can make old-fashioned guys look modern. He can make wobbly guys look solid. Or guys or gals, artists. He can handle Steve Ditko, and he can handle new artists. He can handle Gene Colan. Those are all notoriously difficult to ink people, and he managed to handle them all. So big props to Steve and to Larry, who I think Larry's one of the best storytellers that's ever lived in comics. And there's this funny parallel to this gig in that, if you go back like 5 or 6 years, DC hired both Larry and I to like thumbnail books for other artists that weren't whose storytelling wasn't quite up to snuff.
You were doing that at the same time?
Yeah, I was doing it at the same time Larry was doing it.
Okay, wait, sorry. Let me just give a sentence. So Larry did thumbnails for Deathstroke, for Damage, for Michael Cray, which was part of the Warren Ellis Wildstorm.
I also did Michael Cray.
Okay. And then there's one or two more that I'm forgetting, but Larry did this.
I don't want to run down the artists that we laid out for in any way, because it might not have been that they weren't up to stuff storytelling wise. They might have also been pressed for time. But
I have heard both.
Yeah, but the editors of those books knew that we could sort of give them a head start on the storytelling and also sort of train them up a little bit. And so I was doing mostly Teen Titans and then some stuff for DC's middle grade graphic novel line, and then Michael Cray. So yeah, Larry and I were doing it about the same time. So it seemed natural that I would also, be tapped for one of these silent issues.
One last thing about Steve Leialoha, in your opinion, being such a fine inker, he is also a penciler. He's
a fantastic penciler.
He's the full
Yeah.
package. He can lay out pages. He can draw anatomy and buildings and perspective and horses and magic. And
the best inkers are also good pencilers. Yeah.
Cool. Let's have a look at the covers on the front of these books in the gallery.
Let's have a look at the covers in the gallery.
Phil, I take a moment here to physically describe the covers for people who are listening and not watching.
Sure.
So cover A is drawn by Phil Hester. That includes inks and colored by Lee Lowridge. The camera is about 2 feet off the ground, looking straight on at Beachhead, who's buried in rubble, including part of a chimney. He's got his knife brandished. His costume is torn. There's water dripping on him. He has a grim look to his eyes. In the immediate foreground, there are the legs of 2 Cobra soldiers walking by in profile. And so the story here is that Beachhead is hidden and about to attack them. They are these 2 legs and a little bit of the foreground ground are knocked out in aqua with a little bit of a highlight. And Beachhead's green is more muted. And then all the sort of rubble over and around him is very warm, some magentas and oranges and yellows. This is a cool cover, and it does represent the issue. This is basically a scene from this issue. And Mark,
well described. You did a good job.
Thank you. I have taught besides reading comics forever. I've also taught. Mark, I wanted to talk about this cover with Phil Hester because, to my eyes, it has a little less of the traditional Phil Hester flat graphical reduced geometric and a little bit more of the rounded volumetric look, and that feels very subtle in the inking on Beachhead's mask and then the coloring on, say, his bicep. And this cover does feel a little more detailed than a lot of Phil Hester images that I see. So Mark, I wanted to ask our guest, Phil, did you either do this like well in advance, or did you have a slightly different approach for this cover than you did the interiors?
Yeah, yes to both. We did this before we even nailed down exactly the script for this issue. We knew in broad strokes what would happen this issue, but we did not have the script nailed down because we needed to get this cover, out to the public pretty quickly. So I jumped way ahead and did this cover before I knew what exactly the guts of the issue would be about. But luckily, it does fit in with it. It could be a scene from the issue. I think the difference in the finished aesthetics that you see largely come down to me inking it. And when I ink some, and also because it is in this because it features a junk pile. And so when you draw a lot of rubble and junk, you have to employ texture. If it's really flat and graphic, it'll all look like new stuff and it'll all look like the same stuff. So you have to apply texture to the bricks. You have to apply a different texture to like stuff that has dust or water. All those surfaces have to be treated differently. So I think that accounts probably for the discrepancy between especially my superhero work is much cleaner. And then also my artsier self-published stuff is usually even more high contrast than this. But in this case, when you're drawing junk, you've got to draw the junk. And so, yeah, we had to get in there and get in the nitty gritty with the textures.
Gonna make a shirt and sell it at assembly required. When you're drawing the junk, you got to draw the junk.
Yes.
Phil Hester.
Yeah, that's quote. You can quote me.
That sounds
on
rude.
Yeah.
Mark.
That's some innuendo as well there. We've got, and this cover does come in two flavors: cover A with the colors, and cover C, which is a 1 in 10 black and white. And it is nice that you can kind of get the organic kind of sense of the cover being created here. That you can kind of see the slight variations in the darkness of the blacks just coming from the ink being applied to the page.
Yeah, there are two kinds of covers that are just black and white. There's the art has been scanned and not really futzed with, and you can see variations in solid black ink. And then there is we opened it up in Photoshop and adjusted the contrast, and it's pure white and pure black.
Yeah, and that's what usually will go to a colorist, that the stuff that has been leveled out. And this is not, and it's the closest thing you can get to seeing a piece like this in person. I would say the only difference is maybe the whites are a little less creamy than they are when you see and that's I'm getting very, very, very fine in distinction here. If you ask artists, they'll tell you different inks have different, even though they're jet black India inks. Some feel brown, some feel green, some feel blue, and paper's the same way. So most paper is not quite that kind of brilliant white. It has a little bit of a kind of an eggshell look to it that is probably missing here. But the variation in the ink is there, which is, you used to only see that in like artist editions.
Yeah. I did have a question because I can't see someone under rubble with water dripping down without thinking a little bit about
Spider-Man
the
cover.
Amazing Spider-Man cover, the final chapter, that famous image.
Yeah, if you're a Western comic book artist, that's in your DNA.
So
was this
not an homage, but in the back of your head?
Yeah, it was not an attempt. I submit. My colleagues call me insane because I usually submit a minimum of 4, but up to 6 cover roughs for every cover I do.
Oh, Phil Hester, that's so many.
I know. And the rule of thumb in comics is usually the editor will pick the worst one.
A professional friend of mine confirmed that.
Yes.
And so he started submitting 1 and sometimes 2.
Yeah, and that's probably what I should do. But I can't help myself, and I want to show off all my ideas. So I do. I think we went. I think I sent 4, and Alex picked the one I didn't want to do. But I will say this: he did pick the right one.
Ah.
I wanted to do one that was a little more actiony and showed off Beachhead a little bit more, because in this one he's just a 2 fists, a knife, and a head. And I wanted to do one where you saw more of his figure because, like, I'm a superhero artist, so I want to draw figures. But Alex is a great editor, and he knew that this was the most arresting image, and he also knew that the really great editor, Rob Levin's done this for me before too. He'll take a cover, and he's got like a photograph of a comic book rack, just like a JPEG on his desktop, and he'll shrink down that cover and he'll plop it on a comic book rack, and he'll say, "This is what it'll look like in the store." And you can see how it will stand out, and this cover stands out. All the other ones I submitted, though I would have been happy to draw them and wanted to draw them, they would have looked like another superhero cover. And this has a life of its own. So props to Alex.
Excellent stuff. So moving on to the next cover, we have cover B by George Fornes, which is also available as cover D. A letter virgin foil variant for G being the first letter of this series, spelling out G.I. Joe across the 5 issues. Tim, do you want to pause on this cover?
So in this cover, Beachhead is crouching behind a wall or a doorway. It's quite thick. He has a shotgun. It's smoking. He's starting to peer around it. He's on the left side, so the cover is divided. There's 2/3 of it are him and his background, and then the right side, 1/3 of it is this thick green, let's say metal wall. Behind Beachhead is a background element that I can't quite. Maybe either of you can jump in. There's some white negative space, and there's some sort of muted purple. I can't quite tell if it's like a part of a helicopter or like a building. What am I seeing?
It doesn't matter. No, I'm serious. What Banners is, it looks credible to the eye.
Mm-hmm.
So the best background, like a really great background, like a photorealistic background, would have run counter to the purpose of this background,
and would get busy behind the logo.
Yeah. And so what you want to be the star of the show is Beachhead, and he clearly is the star of this cover. So like the background is not. It's important that it be credible, that you can see it and move on, but not that it not distract you. And Jorge's a fantastic disciple of the Toth school as well, and all his. I'm deeply jealous of him, and like his work is very. It's sort of like the way I would draw if I could draw.
It has been, since this whole project was announced, I have felt that it was a real coup that he was not only doing a cover but 5 covers. He drew the Rorschach maxi series for DC, which, as a Watchmen sequel, not my thing, but oh man, is that a sharp looking book. Yeah. And I'll just add one last element that's on this cover. In the full foreground, there's a scope graphic, as if we're actually looking at Beachhead through crosshairs, and he's about to be under fire by us, some kind of adversary. And then as a design element on 3 of these 4 covers, on the very, very top, there are 2 slivers of manila folder tabs. One which has one of those label maker fonts that says Silent Missions in embossed white letters on a fake black ribbon of tape, and then in a serif font, Beachhead. And this is a really nice element which calls out these issues as something different, to visually differentiate them from the Energon universe and also the regular Hama issues of A Real Hero. And yet, by sharing the regular Real American Hero logo type, that this is that series, that continuity.
Yeah, and if you flip through a long box, there's not going to be any doubt as to what this is.
Yes. I'll just say one more sort of overall thing. There are a few months a year, because there are 52 weeks in a year, but if you multiply 4 by 12, you get 48. So there are a couple months a year where there is a 5th Wednesday, and comics publishers in the last 30 years have started lining up fun projects or stunts. Sometimes they publish a couple extra issues on that 5th week because there is no regular comic schedule then, because Uncanny X-Men may be a 2nd week book, and G.I. Joe may be a 3rd week book. It was back at Marvel, and then in this case, Skybound has lined up 1 issue for each week, and this wonderful theme. And I am so excited as a G.I. Joe fan and as a Real American Hero fan that this finger quotes stunt is not about like a ratio variant or like a hologram or like Skybound insider points, which we can redeem for trading cards, but it's just more pages of story. And then it looks back at this beloved and famous G.I. Joe story without sort of remaking it. You know, they didn't ask Hama to do like a sequel to Silent Interlude, which could be wonderful or could not be. Instead, they asked really interesting talents to do their own wordless stories.
Because I think by and large, we're not typical G.I. Joe people.
Can you talk about this? Because when you were announced, I thought simultaneously, I thought Phil Hester, and I also thought Phil Hester.
Yeah, yeah. I think Alex is one of those rare editors who's not. We're working on it, but he's not jaded yet. So he gets excited by comics and excited by new talent, and so or old talent like me, or talent that maybe hasn't been utilized in certain venues, and so he's got a broader aesthetic scope than a lot of editors, and so like I said, we're not. A lot of the people working on this are not typical G.I. Joe people, and so it was like we're like G.I. Joe demands gearheads. Do you know what I mean? It demands people that are like Michael Golden. You know, Michael Golden was the gearhead of all gearheads. People that enjoy drawing helicopters, people that enjoy drawing, you know, unspent ammo in the belt and getting it exactly right. You know, because G.I. Joe people are going to call you out on that, which is why I had Beachhead lose all his guns at the beginning of this.
Because knives are easy to draw.
Knives are, but also, I mean, I don't want to spoil the issue, but it's a more compelling story to see Beachhead have to improvise his weaponry all the way through the story instead of just have his normal like gear that he would normally have. So, but yeah, Alex went really far afield to look for people that can bring a different perspective to G.I. Joe, and when you do that, sometimes you're demanding. I think there's always great results in comics where when you make a talent uncomfortable about what they're doing, like it would be very easy to hire. I mean, and Alex did it just a couple of years ago. He hired me for a Creepshow story. I fit right in at Creepshow, no problem, a blast. But to ask me to do something I haven't thought about forces me to think in new ways and bring new approaches to my own work, which is really refreshing. And so I hope readers find it as refreshing and as thrilling as I did.
Phil, who picked Beachhead?
Alex.
Okay.
I did not.
Can we come back to that question in just 1 second?
Sure.
Just to close out where we were before. So just to close out on the covers, there are some retailer variants listed on the inside front cover. At the time of recording, we don't have images for them, but they are from Jimbo Salgado, Peter Smith, Sajad Shah, Thiago da Silva, and Karen S. Darbo. So before we get too into like spoilery stuff, let's keep on the safe side of spoilers for a second. But yeah, I think a key question really is how did this specific project come about at Phil, and how did you become connected to it? What was the step that led Alex to reaching out to you? Was it as simply as much as you hearing from him and saying, you know, how would you like to do some G.I. Joe?
I hate to be that simple about it, but yeah, in some ways. I mean, I worked with Alex at DC a lot, and so when he came over to Skybound, he's always had an eye or an ear to the ground for certain projects that I would fit in on. And I've done a lot of stuff at Skybound. I wrote Invincible Universe for a long time,
right?
And like I said, I've done Creepshow as well, and so. And I just I did an issue of Donny Cates' crossover book that featured Robert Kirkman, and that Robert wrote. So I've got a relationship with Skybound that, you know, sort of goes beyond G.I. Joe, and a relationship with Alex that goes beyond G.I. Joe. So it's almost like, you know, an old friend asking them, you know, to help you move, you know, and
Can you help me move all of
Yeah.
these machine guns and
Yeah.
unspent ammo?
Right. And so I said, okay. And but to me, what made it a slam dunk when he told me I would be writing it as well. If it had just been drawing, it came at a time when I was pretty busy, and I'm always a little bit busy, but I was pretty busy, and I was like, if I'd been a rational person, I would have passed. But when he said I'd be writing it as well, I didn't hesitate. I said yes. And so as long as I knew I could approach it in a way that mattered to me, I would definitely do it. So yeah, a lot of it comes down to me being comfortable working at Skybound and with Alex and being able to call shots on what kind of story I was going to do.
Having the writer also be the pencil artist is very much in keeping with the original wordless issue from '84.
Yes.
Do you have favorite A Real American Hero characters, or did you investigate Beachhead and sort of make it?
Yeah, I did a crash course on Beachhead. I knew about you know about the more distinctive G.I. Joes in a visual sense, and I'm glad I got Beachhead because outside of the Ninja E people, he is the most visually arresting to me, and so and also the mask is cool. There's no like it looks cool, and at some level, that's the draw of G.I. Joe is like it's cool, and there's enough of that 10-year-old still alive in me that knows that. And so when he said Beachhead, I was excited because I knew who Beachhead was. And it's one of the few G.I. Joes who I knew about. And I did a sort of a crash course on the rest. But you can't work in comics for 40 years or be a nerd for 40 years and not have at least peripheral knowledge of the G.I. Joe universe.
There is no litmus test. Like, are you fan enough to deserve to work on G.I. Joe? Like, yeah. I don't believe in that, and I think that's insulting. But as a fan, I might have a knee-jerk version of that before I suppress it, or I may be aware of other people out there who have that, and it's fun to hear that you are professional enough to take this on and make it work, but also that you have been tracking this stuff casually. Yeah. Because this stuff, they've got cool costumes and they've got cool gear. Yeah. And I've talked about in some other episodes how, if a Joe takes their costume off and is in a sort of very generic disguise, or there was a story years ago where sort of several Joes just had the same kind of modern, they just all looked like the same sort of 2010 Navy SEAL. And I thought, I don't know who's who, so it's sort of not G.I. Joe anymore. Yeah. It's like the number of Batman covers where Batman's not wearing the Batman cowl is very small. I will say, noting that one of the Chip Zdarsky Volume 4 trade paperback, which came out last week, on the cover has Batman not wearing his cowl.
You're right. But you're right, because like it's what's cool about them. And like that's what people are paying to see. That's why they came to your show, and you got to give it to them. And plus, if you like, I hate to keep talking about how old I am, but if you've been doing this for 40 years, you literally can't keep track of everything. But also, sometimes you're going to be approached about things that are not part of your fandom, and you have to learn about them quickly. And being a professional and being a creative person means being able to assess those properties and sort of fish out what's cool about them and learn how to use it. So I consider it just part of the job. So even if I don't know everything there is to know about Beachhead, I can find out in a couple of days. I can read all the Beachhead material I can get my hands on. And I'm a professional comic book artist and comic book writer. So I have to find a way into that character and a way to do a story that is compelling, 20 pages long, and no talking.
Can we? So, Mark, you go.
I was going to say, so you're given a character, Beachhead, and you're given a kind of theme. It's a silent mission, no dialogue. Where next then for the story? Where did the inspiration come for? Did you come up with a number of different ideas and sort of thrash them out with Alex? Or
I did. I maybe pitched 6 or 7 ideas.
Oh wow!
Before we settled on this one, they did all have the same general theme of Beachhead being out of his element and having to improvise. They all had that sort of, and they also all sort of had an element of him really laying it out to protect some innocence. That was in almost every pitch I sent. But I really like the idea of, because it's Beachhead, we really wanted to hit the stuff of like him being prepared for anything. And if he's not prepared, he'll improvise. And then also like him ambushing the hell out of people. So we really wanted to get all that. We wanted to hit all that. But another thing we really wanted to hit it, and like we barely touched on it, but we also wanted to get into his role as a teacher. And there's a scene in this book where he's obviously teaching, not to get too spoilery, but a couple of war orphans sort of wind up under his wing. They help him and he helps them back. But there's a scene where he's sort of teaching them how to survive in their conditions better, even though he knows the conditions they're in are not sustainable and they shouldn't be there. The teacher and him can't help it, but help instruct them a little bit.
So that's in reference to his file card, him being an instructor at Ranger School. That's kind of that teacher dynamic.
Yeah.
Can you talk about, there is a page after page 20 that has some of your thumbnails.
Yeah.
With tiny handwritten notes under them. And it looks like an 8.5 by 11 sheet of paper with 6 or 7 or 8 thumbnails, all delineated in wonderful, tiny stick figures with like gray Copic marker. And then
that's exactly what it is.
Okay. And then numbered beats for each panel. So is this that next step after your pitch is approved? Is there an intermediate step?
Since there was not a script, because there's no dialogue, and also I'm the artist, so who am I writing a script for? I thumbnailed it and sent the thumbnails to Alex. And there are 3 of these per 8.5 by 11 sheet. And sometimes I would cut them up and move them around. I don't know how. I haven't seen this, so I don't know.
In the back of the book, there's a total of 2 lots of almost 6. So it's 11 total pages are in the book.
So there were times when I omitted a page and I just slapped a big Post-it note on it that said redacted. And there's sometimes when we change the order of pages. So I cut them up and moved, like at the end of it, there's a little art collage of this issue. And to me, that's the joy of making comics. Thumbnailing is where the fun is to me. Figuring out storytelling stuff is fun. And the drawing itself is, it's almost like eating my vegetables. Like I know I have to do it. It's leg day at the gym.
It's the thing that you've got to do after you've done the fun bits. Okay.
Yeah, you got to do it. But to me, the thumbnailing's the fun part. Like figuring out the storytelling is, to me, like the crux of everything.
It's interesting kind of seeing the thumbnails, how, it's obviously very small as initial thumbnail, but kind of quite how much is almost already there versus the final page. And I don't have it on screen, but there's one of the thumbs is that it's page 3 where the guy is getting is it, have I got it, that one? Where you've kind of got that negative space of Beachhead getting punched in the face, so it's like a silhouette in reverse of Beachhead getting punched by this Cobra trooper, and it's right there in the thumbnail. So it's like it's clear that it's right there in the original ideas you're having of like, this would be a fun fun way of representing this thing.
As an artist, that's the stuff that draws me in. Like to me, that's the fun of this. And finding a way to, this is my favorite page from the issue. And it's a fun example of like how to lead an eye across a page. And it was the one I had the most fun with, and I think the one that's the most successful. But yeah, you can see it in the thumbnail, and I didn't change a ton between the thumbnail and the finished work.
Something that struck me sort of reading the issue, and I'm not entirely sure how intentful this was, but it was pages like this where there's quite a lot happening, and some of the page design is a little less conventional. It made me sort of slow my eye down a little bit, and given the fact that there isn't speech bubbles, which normally serve that purpose, it sort of slowed down that reading experience somewhat, because I was paying a little bit more attention to how the page was being laid out to me.
So we're demanding more of the reader in a story like this, because the reader you can read a comic book casually. You sort of take in the artwork almost peripherally while you jump from caption to caption or balloon to balloon. And when we do a silent story, we're demanding you pay attention. And that means, like in the first panel on this page, I have to show that helicopter sort of, spiraling away from this scene. There's no other way to explain why the helicopter also didn't crash on the roof. We just have to know it's out of the picture. So we have to see it going out of the picture. And also when you do a layout that is not 100% conventional, there's a moment of culture. I don't want to say culture shock, but there's a moment of shock for the reader where they have to back out and go, what am I doing here? And, stand back, let me do the driving, but it's not going to be panel to panel to panel to panel. You've got to follow these figures. And when you're doing a silent book, you need to think really intricately about what you're presenting in the panel, but also you need the reader to think that way too. So they need to be looking for visual clues and I should have said cues. They need to be looking at for information that tells them background information about this story. And the only way to do that really is to really be intentional about the way you're pushing them around a page.
Makes sense. And the other thing that I guess as a reader used to Larry Hama stories, we are dropped relatively literally into the beginning of a story. So from the sky in this case, that there's not a setup. We don't know why Beachhead is tied up, why he's in a helicopter, and we don't know for sure why that helicopter's in trouble. We might be able to guess, but we're not wasting time effectively of building up to the story. We're sort of joining exactly where it matters.
You guys bought a G.I. Joe comic. The status quo. It's almost like I don't think they need to recapitulate Superman's origin every time they do a like you're here for Superman. So you can infer that they're in some sort of burned out, bombed out city that's in dispute between Cobra and G.I. Joe. You can assume that Beachhead's been taken prisoner by Cobra, but they didn't get out unscathed either. And so there's this tension that's sort of built into the G.I. Joe dynamic, the Real American Hero dynamic. And so it's cool to take on a property like that where so much of the shorthand is already filled in for you, that it's sort of like if you read a Conan story and at the beginning of it, Conan's got a gig where he's bodyguard to some young princess. Okay. You don't have to explain that. You're like, oh yeah, I could see that. Conan would be a bodyguard to a young princess at some point in his career. We're lucky that Joe has such a well-known milieu that you can drop somebody into the middle of it and they're like, oh yeah. Well, it's like Larry's episode begins with, the good guys that put there at the beginning of the story. So that's also a little bit of an homage to Larry's story.
Phil, this page we're looking at here, page 2, the splash, has 2 Cobra soldiers who are 1982 characters from G.I. Joe. They're toys from the very first year. And then a few pages later, you have a panel or two that shows some alley vipers.
Yes.
Who are later G.I. Joe characters from 1989. And for a new G.I. Joe fan, the difference between 82 and 89 might be almost nothing.
Yeah.
For established G.I. Joe fans, there's a big difference. And I was curious if how much of sort of that kind of decision was your preferences, your familiarity with the brand already, or editor Alex making suggestions?
That was Alex. So when I had originally pitched this, it was all Cobra Troopers. And then when we saw that it was sort of I don't know how spoilery I'm gonna get from here on out. So
we can get into spoilers now with a bit of a warning to our listeners there. That's fine.
When we got into it, and Alex it was very much like, this would be a perfect place for these alley vipers. Like they're they're this sort of urban combat, squad. And we're doing this, like they're doing an assault on this abandoned apartment building where Beachhead is holed up. So it seemed natural to do them. There are other scenes in the issue where they're mixed. There's some troopers in with vipers, like just as they're patrolling the city. So I tried to make that sort of a little buffer, like between those two things. Like I showed just troopers, then them together, and then just vipers going into the building. But yeah, that was Alex's idea to use the vipers, and they look cool, so I'm not going to complain.
I think about sort of as an analogy, sometimes when I see Star Wars stories and I see a bunch of stormtroopers, and then I see, like 20 or 30 stormtroopers, but I see like one of the Emperor's Imperial Guards, or I see like one of the fancier, like the Death Trooper or the Flamethrower Trooper. And I think, oh, what is the decision that got made here that is the ratio, and that they're also including the so-and-so, the special guy. Were there, you just now referred to this splash page and this story beat that we start with a Joe already captured as a bit of an homage to the original silent interlude, which starts with Scarlet already captured. Mm-hmm. Were there any other bits or beats from the original issue 21 that you were thinking of responding to, or not recreating, but sort of taking note of? Like, are there ingredients for this issue?
I would say even this is a happy accident. We needed to get to a certain, because here's a rule of thumb: silent storytelling eats up a lot of real estate on the comic book page. Like you can't have a caption or a character telling you anything. So there's no somebody saying, "Oh, did you hear Beachhead was captured?" Like you can't have a character saying that. So you have to jump right into it. And so that the fact that we both started that way is a cool synchronicity, but not something I planned.
And how much of a challenge did that lack of captions, lack of dialogue present to you? Were there moments like, oh, how am I going to be able to explain this visually without words?
only in the subtler moments. Action speaks for itself, so that stuff comes through very clearly. But there's a scene where I wanted to really get across how desperate the orphan situation is, and how very close to starvation they are, or why they're keeping they have a pigeon coop on the roof, or why these two kids who are starving to death are keeping a pigeon coop. And you have to figure out a way to do that without dialogue. And I did it by showing that they have a shrine to their parents who are not here for one reason or another. Their parents aren't there. But in the pictures, the dads with the pigeons, they have a trophy from, a pigeon race. So that's the sort of things you have to do to communicate things non-verbally. And that's the sort of stuff I look to do anyway. So to me, it's not a challenge. To me, I do that when I have a full script. I try to lade every panel with that kind of information. And I can't tell you what the project is, but ironically, I'm also working on another comic book that's largely silent at the same time. And I think I was approached for both of those gigs because people know what kind of visual storyteller I am, that I'm going to try to give you everything you need visually without having to have it explained through captions or dialogue. So I went through a lot of the same process. In fact, I went through the exact same process I would do when I thumbnailed this, as if I had written something that would have been fully captioned and dialogued.
How long did you have to pencil this issue once your thumbnails?
Not a ton. Well, with anything you do with G.I. Joe has to be approved. It has to go through a long approval process. And so that like eats into your working time. But I wouldn't say it wasn't rushed. It wasn't any like shorter than a normal comics thing, but I didn't like get to marinate on it for months and months before I started working. Like we got it pitched, approved, and then jumped right in. So it was pretty quick from pitch to wrap up. We're like fairly quick as far as comics projects goes.
Phil, you drew many comics for publishers more than 10 years ago when standard issues were 22 pages.
Yes.
Standard issues are now 20 pages, to my great disappointment. Do you notice a difference?
No, because I mean, when I was coming up, comics are 18 pages. Like a lot of the comics that came out in the 60s and 70s were 18 pages long, and they had a lot of ads. Or they were 3 7-page stories or whatever. They were. And I also, when I came up in that black and white explosion, there were a ton of anthologies during that time, and that's sort of where I cut my teeth as a storyteller. And so you sometimes you had to do stories that were 4 pages long. So you had to really think in terms of like the economy of your storytelling. And so 20 pages I don't feel hemmed in by 20 pages.
And an observation from me about this story is the G.I. Joe does have a somewhat rich history of taking inspiration from the world around us and looking, the world outside our window. And one of the main examples being that when we had the Gulf War, that sort of I guess was a jumping on point for a story involving Emirates in benzene and Trucial Abisma fight with Cobra, wanting to take over and get control of the oil and that kind of thing. Noticeably here that we're sort of looking at a war-torn country, looks something like Eastern Europe. I'm guessing looking at what's going on in the world and having somewhat of an inspiration there.
Yeah, you don't want to nail anything down too much to a real world situation, because you don't want it to have to suddenly you'll have to offer a comment about that real world situation, and that a G.I. Joe comic might not be the place for that. But we wanted to have a setting that was like recognizable to people as something that was credibly a war-torn environment. And sadly, there have been enough conflicts, if you go back to, Kosovo and on, where formerly thriving, what are recognized as European cities are reduced to not war zones, basically. I mean, the story is titled DMZ, but DMZs are like, they're sort of no man's lands where a lot of weird, like bad things for the people who live in them happen. And the focus of the story is, Beachhead's ostensibly the main character, but the main character are the 2 orphans that we see in this issue, and the choices they make, and how that can help Beachhead and how that can change Beachhead.
You just said this.
Interesting.
issue,
You called out. Yeah, I think we're about to say the same thing, Tim. Go on.
You have a title for this issue, and in addition to comics all being 2 pages shorter, now G.I. Joe issues written by Larry Hama have not had issue titles since like 1994. Well, I guess there was that one story in 2003. But when G.I. Joe came back with issue 156 at IDW in 2010, none of Hama's issues have had issue titles, and I wish they would. I don't know if that's his decision or editorial, but neat that yours has one. I note on the inside front cover, it's not there.
Yeah, that was a working title that we were working with, and so it may be in notes here and there in the thumbnails. I don't know if it is, but that was just
it's certainly in this solicitation information. That it calls out that Beachhead is trapped in a DMZ. Yeah,
and so I don't know Larry's decision there. Larry might see it all as one long story, like his body of work on G.I. Joe is one long story. Could be. I don't know.
Yeah.
Could have something to do with the dynamics of picking up an individual issue off of the newsstand back in the mid 80s versus how comics are consumed these days, perhaps, but
could be.
Phil, so I think we've got to the end of most of our questions, our general questions there about and discussion about the issue. It was really interesting. And thanks so much for being so generous with your time. Normally, at this point, we just offer the mic up to our guests to plug the things they want to plug and say where they can be found on the internet. So,
if you're you can find me as Phil Hester on both Twitter and Blue Sky, and I will besides this G.I. Joe Beachhead, I'll have some more work coming out from Dark Horse that I can't announce. Sorry. And some more from IDW that I can't announce until later this year. But rest assured that I'm behind the scenes making the donuts. As we said at the beginning, I'll be inserting my work into your comic book collection, whether you want me to or not, for many years to come.
Perfect. Thank you so much.
Thanks, guys.
So, Tim, that was great. Phil Hester, what a great guest. Long admired his work. Big fan of a lot of the things that he's done over the years. I think he first came onto my radar with Green Arrow, and I really loved the work that he did on the Ant-Man that I think was written by Robert Kirkman. And a few, and the recent Gotham City was great as well. But sort of pretty much anything he touches is worth paying attention to.
If you had told me in, what was it, 97, 96, 99, 2000, when Phil Hester was drawing Archer's Quest and Quiver, if you had told me not only this guy bringing Green Arrow back from the dead, but you were going to interview him in 25 years for G.I. Joe, I would have said, huh? And as someone who likes it when creators work on a project, a property, and then go back to it many years later, I just love the idea that Phil Hester has been drawing covers for Green Arrow, or at least he was this past summer during the Absolute Power tie-in issues, and that's fun. Let's talk about this. Let's talk about this wordless issue.
Okay, let's get going with a plot breakdown, shall we?
Plot breakdown.
A Cobra helicopter in distress is streaming smoke, and falling from the helicopter are 2 Cobra troopers and their captive, Beachhead. They land on a rooftop where there are 2 children. Beachhead takes out the troopers but is injured in the tussle. The brother and sister take him to their home to recover. The girl barters for a satellite phone to bring for help. A squad of alley vipers follow her back, but Beachhead gets all home alone on their asses and takes a bunch down. Escaping to the roof, they are saved by Joe's in a Tomahawk helicopter, making the Alley Vipers stand down. They evac Beachhead and the kids, leaving the war-torn city behind. It packs a punch.
Yeah. One of the things that I appreciate about these 5 issues is that they are not Snake Eyes stories. And so, and for having Larry Hama not involved in any of them, they can stand on their own much more differently. If one of them had Snake Eyes, if all of them were tie-ins or expansions to the original silent interlude, we would be so distracted by the comparison. And Beachhead has gotten very little time in the spotlight in G.I. Joe comics. I assume he was in issue 275, but I can't remember. And so, for the sliver of Joe fans out there for whom this is their favorite character, right? What a treat. I think Beachhead is my brother's 3rd favorite Joe. So I think the math conversion, that means he's my 14 and a half favorite Joe. So I'm excited that he gets a whole issue. I'm struck by, when Phil Hester was announced as part of this, it's that reaction that I was sort of jokingly saying to him earlier in the episode, like, who's this guy getting a G.I. Joe issue all to himself? He hasn't written G.I. Joe, right? This sort of ugly reaction of he doesn't deserve. It's well, if it's not going to be Larry Hama, who's it going to be? And also, I'm not the editor, and the editor really does get to pick. That's their job. And also, Phil Hester has drawn dozens and hundreds of comics and written dozens and dozens of comics. And I like everything he said about being a professional, you figure it out and you do it, in addition to already being able to do a lot of it. So I'm struck by, in some ways, how different this is from the original silent interlude. And then also in a couple cases, how it's similar. The first page here is not a splash. And so it immediately sets up as something different. But like the original silent interlude, this issue has a ton of visual storytelling. And I mean, my notes, everything is established on page 1, right? Everything that is established on page 1, right? So panel 1, winter, war-torn city, the architectural style does make it look like Eastern Europe. And you even get time of day. And then in the second panel, there's so much work. Phil Hester does so much work in the second panel, right? 2 people, pigeon coop. We're on the roof, right? Which the first panel didn't necessarily solidify, but it offered the potential. And one of the 2 kids has a slingshot, is aiming it at some toys. One of the toys is an action figure, like a military action figure with a weapon. So that's going to set up for this bit of hero worship that happens later in the issue when the kid takes his winter cap and puts it on like he's Beachhead. And this almost looks ahead, like foreshadowing, like he's got this action figure, and then this action figure falls from the sky, 4 panels, 1 page turn later. Right, we see the pigeons sort of more in close up. Sorry, back to page 1 in panel 3. The fact that there's this rule in short stories that you don't waste a word, or you don't waste a frame, or you don't waste a panel. And this third panel here, where we're in the pigeon coop looking out at the girl, is not just a bit of sort of decoration or mood setting, right? These are sort of motivating prop characters, the birds, that gets us into the mindset of this brother-sister pairing. And also the pigeons have a story beat later on page 18. And this is all of this And also in panel 4, right? I guess that's snow in front of the silhouette on the bottom right of that panel. But okay, in a general sense, you see that these buildings are sort of crumbly and damaged. And that's going to be a story element in 2 pages when an actual piece of the roof breaks. And then suddenly there's some choreography with, Beachhead and a Cobra soldier. So this is one of those cases where dialogue and captions wouldn't hurt this story. And, as an exercise, as a writing exercise, it would be fun to take this first page or take this whole issue and write dialogue and captions, and then force yourself to sort of reduce it. All right, take 20% of all the dialogue and captions out. Now take another 20% out. What's the bare minimum you can get? And, and then we sort of prove that you actually don't need any of it, that all of the story beats are clear. There are 2 of them that are less clear, but out of like 60, I am very satisfied.
Yeah, I agree with all of that. And as a more sort of general point, and this is our first of the silent missions that we're covering, and they're coming out weekly. So we'll have a few more of these. But as a kind of principle, and why potentially this this series not being a Larry Hama series, is that these are all one shots. They all are one and done. They're kind of, capsule episodes to a degree that it's by its very nature, you're dealing with 20 pages which don't include dialogue, which means that they've got to be quite self-contained, quite focused, and you can't necessarily build up a massive story because it's kind of got to be self-contained and resolved by the end of it. So there's less there that's necessarily going to conflict with the main ARA story or need to be picked up. And also because it's silent as well, there's less risk of someone else getting the voices wrong as well. Beachhead wouldn't say that. Well, actually, he's not saying anything. So that's one less thing to worry about in terms of the writer and the voice of these characters.
This is a good point about the sort of available canvas or the optimum canvas of the both wordless issue and also the single issue. I don't think anyone would pitch a big Cobra Joe battle with lots of vehicles and, Cobra Commander and Destro and the Baroness on one side, and some ninjas and, Duke on the other side. Because you're going to, Phil Hester earlier in the episode was starting to say, or did say, wordless stories take up a lot of space fast. And I was trying to think of sort of a specific example, and this issue is full of them. But just sort of think of any story beat where if someone is expressing sort of something immediate to someone else, if you have Beachhead and the girl or the boy and the girl, if one of them says in a dialogue version, we have to get out of here, you could do that in one panel. If you do it without words, sort of think about sort of the visual beats. Maybe you need 2 minimum, like they see something out the window, they hear something, a missile or a bomb coming, an air raid siren, even if you don't know what it is, right? You just sort of pantomime the character seeing something out the window or, hand to ear, hearing something, or like the camera is now up in the ceiling looking down at them and they have turned to look up at us, the camera, and they see something, right? And then the next panel, maybe it's the girl and she's like shoving Beachhead from, his lower back and pointing to the door. It's like, we have to go. And maybe you could argue, well, it's not specific enough. What are they actually fleeing? Is it a flood? Is it a fire? Is it a missile? Besides the sort of action choreography of the sort of middle and late pages of Beachhead being Beachhead and fighting, there's just a lot of good movement through space and establishing of characters' backstory and motivations with a sort of minimum of space and props and a maximum of efficiency. And I wanted to demonstrate how smart I am by pointing out page 7, panel 1, and page 7, panel 2. And Phil Hester, who wrote and drew this issue, very fairly called those out already. So I guess he's smarter than me because he came up with it, and I don't get to look smart for saying, look what I noticed in the comic that this guy put there purposefully. So page 7, panel 1, the two kids have dragged Beachhead in and laid him on the floor. And we're reminded that it's cold. It's not just cold outside because it's snowing. It's cold inside because we can see the kids' breath as they exhale, which means they don't have heat, right? Which makes it even worse. So what's behind them? Okay, a family photo, can't make it out. Next to it, a photo of someone, can't make it out. Next to it, some kind of metal object with a bird, can't quite make it out. A little box with a red plus sign on it, a red cross, so first aid kit. And then next to it, some bottles. Okay, so this is setting up some stuff, and it's not enough.
Yes. So,
but in the next panel, we get closer.
Oh, right.
And Hester very smartly has on the left side put this portrait of the family of 4. You see a mother and these two kids, and she's got a stethoscope around her neck. So she's a doctor. And then the dad is cropped out, which is fine because over on the right side, we see 2 photos that we couldn't quite make out in the previous panel. One with the dad, and it's just an old man. It's just a man with a mustache, right? So we're taking it on faith that he's the dad, but we can assume it's the dad. In one, he's standing in front of a flag and he's wearing military uniform and he's got some awards. So it's a military portrait. And then the picture next to it, he is standing next to the pigeon coop and he's holding a pigeon. And then the girl back in the middle of the panel, as she's getting close to the first aid kit, is pointing to a trophy with a pigeon on it, right? So as Mark, you just said, this panel particularly, but as a additive to the previous panel, has like a paragraph's worth of script backstory for who these characters are. And then it motivates that the girl, the older sister, she actually can help Beachhead because she has either seen her mom at work or her mom has taught her. But of course, what's also happening here is we are only seeing these 2 parents in photos on the wall and some props that represent them, first aid kit and a trophy with a bird on it, but they're not in the story. So they're absent. And we'll assume that they're dead, which, makes it even harder. Maybe they've been conscripted. Maybe they're in a prison somewhere, but they're gone. And so these 2 kids have to fend for themselves and then also have this added burden of saving this man. And so these 2 panels and one panel particularly are doing a lot of work here. And I don't mean that in a bad way. Sometimes that's a criticism, like this one scene is doing all the work, or this one line of dialogue in a movie is doing all the work to explain all these things that aren't explained. What's actually happening here is Hester is using all of his skills as a writer, as an artist, as a visual communicator, right? And every time we've ever said visual storytelling in an episode of Talking Joe, every time Larry Hama has ever said visual storytelling in an interview, this is the kind of thing that this refers to, telling a story with the pictures. And that's not to say you can't ever have the words, but how much of the work are the pictures doing it? Because those are the prime mover, right? I'm not reading comics for dialogue.
It can be quite nice though.
Yes.
But yes, there's a lot of real clarity in the storytelling, and each one of these panels is doing quite a lot of heavy lifting. It's typically doing multiple things, like sort of later on in the book when Beachhead is being presented with this satellite phone, or we can kind of intuit what it might be, but this communication device. And the next panel, he's kind of looking at it, sort of getting a bit, he's looking a bit exasperated. The girl is still sort of, tending to his arm a little bit and fussing. So we're sort of getting that idea that he's being, looked after and treated, and getting a bit more physically, well. And in the same panel, this boy is sort of doing something with his hat. He's cutting out these eye holes that we'll see later on, and then cut to Beachhead sort of exasperated with the phone. He's not getting a signal. Hold out the window to see if he can get a better signal, and that's an excuse for him to look out the window and see these alley vipers approaching. And then, obviously he's going to want to get away with them from them, but no dialogue. Very clear, finger up in the air. Let's go to the roof.
Which is about better reception for the phone, as well as I take that as primarily about better reception for the phone. But those two panels in the middle, where we're looking up at this window as Beachhead is leaning out as he's pushed the curtain aside, and that is a very specific. I think we all know this body language. The pose when you're standing and leaning up and forward and reaching with your arm to get your phone not sort of almost as high as you can, but also away from your head at a diagonal, and you sort of rock it back and forth or wave it, maybe a few inches this way. Why don't I turn 180 degrees? And that is the tiniest amount of art on this page, right? The square footage of Beachhead as doing this pose, this acting pose on this page is like half of my pinky fingernail.
Yeah.
And yet it's really clear. And I thought for a second, should Phil Hester have zoomed in and drawn this a little bit closer? Like, no, because we want to see sort of that they're not on the first floor. And by having the camera far enough away, we can see one more broken window below them and also a broken window above them. So they're not on the first floor and they're not on the top floor, which is going to give a little bit more, which is going to allow for more of the sort of fight that's coming up when the alley vipers are in the staircase. Okay, but I want to talk about these two panels as one more comparison. So these bottom two panels in the center of page 11. Do you remember when we talked about issue 314, and then we interviewed Andrew Krahnke, and there were two panels that I really liked when near the back of the book, the Joes come into this space and they're up on a catwalk, and some of the bad guys are going up the stairs and we're looking past them. And then there's this reverse angle where now we're above and behind Tunnel Rat as he aims down at those bad guys who are coming up the stairs. And you can see sort of more of their control space where they were. And he shoots all four of them. This is doing something similar, right? Shot, reverse shot, right? We're sort of where the alley vipers are in this first of two panels, even though I don't think that they see him. That's not what this panel is. But in that reverse angle, as we're now back inside the apartment looking past him over his shoulder, past the phone, right? It's really helpful that Hester drew the phone, that he didn't forget to bring Beachhead's right hand just a little bit into this panel to just remind us, no, he's still got the phone. He's still got the phone. But he sees the alley vipers, right? And so now there's this worry, there's this urgency. But also, what else is happening in that final panel, right? Several things are happening. Beachhead is pointing up. We got to go up. Beachhead is handing the older sister the phone. But also, I didn't catch this the first two times I read it. This is the panel where the younger brother puts the mask on. And, some comics, that would be a full splash page. This like kid empowerment, like fantasy, like, oh, the 8-year-old, that's me. He gets to be Beachhead. We all get to be Beachhead. I'm going to buy this page. It's a big splash page that the artist drew of this kid cosplaying as a Beachhead. He gets to be the hero. Like, no. That is a fun, important story beat, but it's not any more important than any of the other story beats on this page. And it's sort of like an icing on the cake one. It's more about sort of theme of sort of rescue and hero worship. It's not actually about like, this kid's a badass, cool. And then sort of this unusual graphical treatment, unusual is too strong, this uncommon graphical treatment for this final panel where it's a vignette panel. Hester drops out the background and the border, and it's just these three characters standing in a field of white, which he does once every like 3 pages for the story. And it's just a way to break up the visuals, and also a different way to make this panel important.
And then the sort of the back half of the issue is really that kind of Beachhead solo in the building against this squad of alley vipers doing what I described in the plot breakdown as home aloneing them. He's able to do a number of kind of little traps of being up in the ceiling and grabbing someone with rope, then sort of being underneath and stabbing someone through their foot, chucking down a fridge freezer down the stairs on top of them, and
this is a cameo appearance. This is the first time Fridge has ever shown up in the interiors. I think he's on that one cover with Every Joe Ever, but this is the first time Fridge, G.I. Joe's special football training agent, has made an appearance, and he's already in place in this war-torn. Sorry, keep going.
Mail away Fridge.
What else does
and then do? He grabs them through a wall, which I think I can't think of. Again, there's certain things that I see in a comic and instantly remind me of something else, but similar to
RoboCop.
Oh yeah, that's true. I was going to say Batman Year One. Something similar happens in there as well.
Nice.
But yeah, very very artfully done. A lot of interesting design in these combat sequences. And then we get the payoff that the satellite phone has worked, and as they are we've got the moments with the payoff
payoffs
for the dove, the pigeons. There's a reason for these pigeons with the girl opening the coop, them flying into the alley vipers and then disorientating them, and then finally the Joes arrive.
And earlier the younger brother, he gets to save Beachhead or give Beachhead a moment because he has put on his Beachhead mask and he pulls out his slingshot, which was established at the top of page 1, and it distracts these alley vipers. So these two kids, they don't take up arms because that might happen in an actual war-torn city with orphans. And I think Larry Hama has referred to this kind of thing a few times in G.I. Joe comics, but
they have access to a gun. Let's not forget, but they barter that for the phone.
Right. But in terms of sort of finishing, there's closure on something that has been set up for both of them. That those bits of those props, the pigeon coop and this toy that the boy has on page 1, those weren't just sort of decorative or like, they've got like a broken TV or like a broken blender in the kitchen. It's like no. Hester wastes no space. The props or the important objects that the kids have on page 1, that they have on page 7, these are all integral to the story. And if you didn't set up the slingshot in page 1, then when it shows up on page 17, you'd think, oh, where'd that come from? Right. And
similarly, this as you said, technique that this scrappy technique that Beachhead is employing to fight is, in part it's because he's injured. He can't, be quite as in your face in terms of how he deals with the troopers, but it's also only possible to fight in this way because of the surroundings he's in this bombed out building that is crumbling, that allows him to grab someone through a wall or be underneath them and stick a knife through the floorboards into their foot, that kind of thing.
There's also the final 2 pages offer an interesting and satisfying resolution, right? I love the cameo of the Cobra Aspid helicopter back on page, is it 2? Hey, neat. I finally get to see Phil Hester, who's a really particular visual stylist in comics who's never drawn G.I. Joe before, to not just draw Beachhead for a bunch of pages, but like Beachhead in costume, thank goodness. But also, that Cobra helicopter. And then on the second to last page, cool, the tomahawk. Oh, look, we get one panel of 3 more Joes, right? Like that's really fun. I guess 2 more panels. And then this final, the final 4 panels. What we should talk about these final 4 panels, because I feel like Phil Hester, the writer, is saying something here about action or combat or war, because so they're on the helicopter. So the 3 Joes in the helicopter have rescued not just Beachhead but also the 2 orphans. They're all on the helicopter, and Beachhead takes off the kid's mask. And then what happens in the second to last panel on the last panel, Mark?
The mask is falling from the tomahawk down to the ground, surrounded by these pigeons. And then,
so the pigeons are free, and the mask is abandoned. And then what's the final panel of the story?
Well, the final panel is this mask lying abandoned on rubble, I guess surrounded by people in this war-torn DMZ environment, sort of scrubbling through the remains and this rubbish, and sort of, trying to scavenge what they can get to get by, I guess.
Yeah.
And I guess there's 2 messages here, which is, I think, that the kids have been rescued. They're being taken away. They're free, like the pigeons, but also by taking away that mask and discarding it, it's they're being rescued from that violence, and also given a respite that you potentially can be still kids. You can be kids for longer, and you don't have to wear this mask of war.
Yeah. I wanted to go back to as an ending. I think it's quite powerful, and sort of maybe the final comparison, fairly or unfairly, between any wordless G.I. Joe story that's not like a 5 or 10 page vignette, but a 22 or 20 page full story. One of the things that is so exciting about the original silent interlude is the surprise of the final page, the reveal that these 2 main characters on opposite sides have something in common, but it's visual and it promises a backstory, right? Snake Eyes and Storm Shadow's tattoos, but it's not explained what that means. Hama doesn't start explaining it in the comic for 5 months and then continues to explain it for years. And so that's Snake Eyes gets away with Scarlet, and Storm Shadow is left holding the bag, holding the unraveling wrist bandage. And so, any self-contained G.I. Joe issue, I'm looking for like good choreography, a hook, some action, and a good landing, and a stuck landing, and a good ending. And I like this ending. Hester manages to, bring. The kids aren't just props. They're not like in the middle of the story and we don't see them again. They're not just at the beginning of the story, right? This isn't a Beachhead solo story. This is a Beachhead story with these 2 kids. Sort of like that episode of Batman. I've got Batman in my basement, and I haven't watched in a long time. And so the story actually ends not on Beachhead, but sort of literally that the middle panel with everyone in the helicopter from left to right. It's Beachhead, but then the 2 kids, and then we spend 2 panels on the boy, and 1 panel on the mask and the birds, and then 1 panel on the mask, but everyone else who's left behind. So
what's left behind? Yeah.
So it's a partial rescue. We can feel a little good about it, but war is still awful. I wanted to jump back and just point out the 3 most unusual panels ever in G.I. Joe comics, and then the 2 sort of story beats that were clear, but I thought could have been a little clearer. You called out one of these already on page 3. 1, 2, 3. On page 3, what is panels 2, 3, and 4 are these unlassoed, no background, they don't have panel borders, sort of vignette panels, right, of the Cobra soldier walking up to Beachhead to punch him. I guess that one technically has a background because there's a little bit of blue for snow footprints.
Mm-hmm.
And then this panel you called out where Beachhead's head and shoulders are a negative space silhouette in front of the spotted black shadow of the Cobra soldier having swung a punch. This is the most unusual panel in G.I. Joe comics, I think. And then the next one where Beachhead does this surprise sort of kick twirl or kick fall over. And these things are like almost impeding into the sort of proper space of the next panel. And it's, I think if you're new to comics, this is your first comic, you would find this page confusing. I think this kind of, as Hester said to us just now, you know, wordless comics demand attention from the reader. You know, you can't read them fast. You have to pay attention and sort of stop. Like, what am I looking at? What's going on here? And I looked at this page and this tiny, tiny part of me thought, oh no, Hester's, it's falling apart. What's he doing? It's not going to work. And then I thought, oh, this is actually quite artful and complex and is not traditional and is not easy. And, you know, that strong diagonal on that third one where Beachhead's kicking the Cobra and, you know, the two kids are seeing it, but now it's like the camera has sort of moved back around to be in front of them. This is unusual and fun.
And you could kind of project on this as well that it's kind of slightly chaotic. It's like what's going on, and that's almost like the messiness of a physical fight like this of being slightly disorientated.
There's also something great happening in the panel below where it's a little hard to see because of sort of the actual pose and drawing and color, but under those two kids, this is where Beachhead is looping his bound wrists under his ankles so that while he's still handcuffed, his arms are now in front of him. And then you see that in that full body shot on the next page. All right. So in addition to that negative space silhouette panel of the punch, jumping ahead to page 13, there are these two panels during the Beachhead takes out the Alley Vipers sequence where Hester draws these two sort of inverted silhouette panels, and you just see the silhouettes of four Alley Vipers. Two are closer and bigger, two are further and smaller, with all of this sort of debris and like hanging sort of cords and stuff from above them. But instead of drawing silhouettes, black silhouettes for characters and debris with a white background, Hester has all of the characters and props white, and it's all the negative space around them, between them, that gets filled in as a color, as this sort of grayish and then this maroonish. And it's I don't think we have seen panels like this in G.I. Joe comics, and that's the fun thing you get a little of when you ask an artist like Phil Hester. You know, Phil Hester is in this Alex Toth school where he's dealing a lot with geometric shapes as character and compositional and storytelling elements. He's using a lot of black ink for shadows. He's not drawing a lot of lines, you know, like a Jim Lee Scott Williams image. He's not expecting his color artist to render. And you know, G.I. Joe hasn't had a lot of art like this that's more blocky or flats or about, you know, shadows and design, like a little bit of, you know, Tony Salmons, who drew about 4 issues at Marvel, Antonio Fuso and Werther Deladera drawing the Cobra series for IDW. But, you know, G.I. Joe tends to be much more in the sort of, you know, Joe Kubert, Ron Wagner, Chris Mooneyham mode, or the, you know, like post Jack Kirby, Gil Kane, like, you know, Mark Bright, you know, mode. And so anyway, these 3 panels are weird and fun and unusual. And then lastly, I just want to point out two story beats that I thought were clear but could be clearer. One is on page 7. So under those two wonderful panels that we talked about with all these interesting background props, photos of family in the trophy, panels 4 and 5, help me out, Mark. So the sister has grabbed the first aid kit and a bottle, and she's heading back to the patient. And then there's a panel of the boy's hand, and he's reaching for a knife. Where is the knife? And then what is the boot that comes in to sort of stop him? What's happening in these two panels?
So panel 1, the boy is just next to Beachhead, where he's lying down on a blanket near his leg.
Yeah.
There. So then when we see the hand, I think the knife is maybe on Beachhead's belt or close to it. The hand is sort of hovering above, a blanket. I think the boy is still in approximately the same location. So he's sort of going to reach for this knife, and the girl's foot then is sort of moving to block his hand, and like, we're not going to be getting weapons and sort of getting into a fight ourselves, essentially, I think is the message there. Don't be trying to do anything stupid.
Okay.
And I think it's called out in the thumbnails in the back of the book to some degree as well, where it says, as Sis takes down water, Bro leans towards Beachhead. High angle, close in on Bro reaching for Beachhead's sheathed knife. Next, repeat, but Sis kicks Bro's hand away.
Oh, kicks. Okay. I don't think I got all of the subtlety of that. I think I was a little confused about where Beachhead's torso was, and that the camera had sort of gone from like the left side of Beachhead to the right side of Beachhead. And then I wasn't quite sure whose boot that was. And I understand logically, Tim, it could only be the sister because it's the brother's hand and it's Beachhead's torso or leg that's at the top of the panel. This is where I might say, like, if only her pants had been sort of more of a different color from Beachhead's clothing. So
there's this little something that I think gets lost in translation between the thumbnail and the finished work on this one, which is that thing that you only really do in comics, which is those kind of, kinetic energy lines of movements. And so that kind of in that simplistic thumbnail kind of gives you a bit more of an indication of the movement of that foot sort of kicking the fingers away, whereas here it's a little bit less and more ambiguous. It's like, maybe looking like a blocking of the hand, perhaps. But
and then on the next page, in that middle tier, all right. So the boy's gone outside to scavenge, and he finds some Cobra gear, and he comes back in. Like, look what I found! I found, a Cobra belt with, whatever it is, a pistol or a knife, and he puts it down. This is great, by the way. On panel 4 of this page, page 8, when his hands come into the panel, what is on the left side in the background? We're reminded of the image of the father with the military uniform and the awards. So that's a reference back. Okay, so the boy puts the belt down near his toys, which is just another great reminder of sort of all of these key themes and props. Then in panel 6, I looked at this and I thought, okay, I don't quite know what this is. And then 2 panels later, I saw the can of sardines or tuna, and I thought, oh, he must be hungry. But this panel 6, where he's looking off to the side, he's got his hands in front of him, and she's looking back at him. The body language didn't read to me as like, I'm so hungry. And now that I'm looking at it again, I think, oh, he's looking over towards where they keep this one last bit of food. But I think I wanted some more sort of caricature, exaggerated, like need Like I'm hungry, eyes bugging out, clenching teeth, which may not actually fit here. Those are my notes.
Yeah, and the thumbnails again sort of help us fill in the blanks or confirm what we're thinking. For that panel particularly, it says Sis looks back at bro, rubbing stomach in hunger. So that is absolutely what he's trying to convey, that he's hungry. She's looking back into the pantry and seeing that there's not much there, just the tin of tuna and crackers. Right. So yeah, I think we don't have. I think we've covered this quite a lot. We didn't have to go necessarily panel by panel. I think that a lot of the enjoyment here is it's a silent issue. Sort of take it in at your own speed and just enjoy the storytelling. In at home in your own environment without us having to call it all out. But it was a delight to spend some time in the company of this particular issue. So I think,
and I'll just say one last thing. The last time we had a wordless G.I. Joe story was issue 275, which was all splash pages. It was the end of a big story arc, so there was maybe some pressure on it to deliver. It was a big fight in a city with all the good guys and bad guys. And it also came after all the comics publishers had suspended publishing for a few months and then resumed publishing just a few months earlier. And so that issue bears a lot of weight for being a wordless issue, and is sort of not a good comparison with issue 21 because there's so many differences. And the sort of the thing that issue 21 wanted to do, tell an exciting, tight story with some character moments. Phil Hester's G.I. Joe Silent Missions Beachhead DMZ does as well, and does well.
Very good. So that is us done talking Silent Missions Beachhead, but it is not us done with Silent Missions because these are coming out on a weekly basis. So next week, April the 9th, is the Jinx story from DANI. The week after that, April 16th, is Leonardo Romero with Spirit. Then returning to G.I. Joe is Andrew Krahnke on April 23rd with Roadblock, before Wes Craig wraps up on April 30th with Duke. So a few more weeks of weekly G.I. Joe goodness, because we often say, what's better than G.I. Joe? More G.I. Joe. So very much looking forward to that. And beyond that, from Talking Joe, much more besides, as we cover ARAR as it comes out, as well as the G.I. Joe Energon Universe title, and more fun and surprises besides. You can find us on talkingjoe.co.uk. That is the website that links to all of the places that we are at, if that's a sentence. You can find us on Facebook group, where we talk about the latest news and discuss all of the latest episodes. We're also on Twitter, Instagram, and all of those kinds of places. We are also on Patreon, patreon.com/Talking Joe. So a big thanks to our backers: Richard, Sam, Bill, Christopher, Justin, Rob, Shane, Simon, Chris, Joe, Craig, Frank, Mike, D, Shame version 2, and Infinite Entertainment, who are all getting early access to episodes as well as some exclusive content. Tim, where can you be found when you're not talking to me and illustrious artists?
YouTube at Atomic Abe, my store, Hub Comics, and my blog, arealamericanbook.com.
Very good. So I think that is us done for the week. But remember that...
Nobody Beats Talking Joe, an international podcast.
Laters.